Great to connect with you, and I hope the sun is shining for you wherever you are today as we explore making a great impression. Some of you may have been on some of our webinars with the IGD in the past, in which case you'll remember my voice. I'm Liz. I run a company called Courageous Success, and we work globally to help people to be the best of themselves. And the best way I always find to introduce myself and what I do and we do is to say, I'm pretty much an expert in you being you. And so I hope that you really take the time to think and spend some time on working on you in this next kind of 45 to 50 minutes. So as Robin has shared, this is all about making a great impression. What we're going to do is we run for about 45 minutes and then we'll have a Q&A. We're going to have some live polls. So I want to get you thinking about how you think about your impressions now. And we'll be using the workbook a couple of times. So this isn't a TED talk. This is about you spending quality time with yourself, thinking about how to advance yourself and your career by being the best of yourself. So you want to have that editable worksheet handy. If you haven't got it, you can use pen and paper, but it does help to download that. And as Robin has shared, he's put that into the Q&A. So let's get going and think about how we can create a great impression on other people. The first thing that I wanted to do is really explore what's important about making a good impression and what are some facts. And I pulled in a bit of fun around some of those facts too. But on a deadly serious point, we tend to worry what people think about us, and we can overthink how we make an impression, who we should be. And I want us to explore some of those things. We also tend to think about making great first impressions. We don't always think about the impact of when we leave a meeting or a conversation. So those kind of end impressions, those last impressions and the impact there. So I want to just explore some of that with you as well today. As ever, I've brought in some tactics, some tools that will help you in your reactions and also things that you can think about when you think about alternative routes of impression like emails and calls and interviews. And ultimately, how you can really create a positive memory on the people that you impact with, people that you connect with, so that maybe they remember you forever, but for all of those good reasons. So let's start off then by having a look at why making a great impression is so important. There's some super interesting facts and stats out there in the world about what makes a good first impression, but also why. And I was flabbergasted when I first started researching impressions to see that it can often take 5 seconds for people to decide if we're charismatic or not. Super interesting, isn't it? 5 seconds. And the number one tool that we have to make a good impression is actually our eyes. Eye contact is so important. And there's a lot of data research that also shares that when we actually connect through the eyes and create eye contact, that it also ups the perception of our IQ. So we can appear to be even more competent when we connect with each other with eye contact too. Appearance is super important. I'm going to touch a little bit on this later on in the webinar. But I thought it was super fun that actually, our appearance in the data and research can really show how trustworthy we are, how powerful we are, how promiscuous we are. And people decide how trustworthy you can be in 1/10 of a second. Imagine that. I think it's a really interesting reflection to maybe notice within yourself and ourselves, how quickly do you make up your mind about somebody, and what are you kind of looking for? What is it that you're researching and questioning when you're doing that split second thinking? Probably super interesting. The science, though, is really fascinating when you think about your career. So, having leadership potential is something that we all want to have. Even if we lead people now, the impression that we give can really contribute to how we lead, but also the promotions that we get and the opportunities throughout our career. But the science also shows that how we show up makes us kind of more or less dateable as well. So if you're in that zone of your life, then I'm sure you'd be pretty close to thinking about how you're your impressions are landing. But also, using some of the work that we do, we've just completed the first research into being yourself at work. And the global survey shared a really, really quite powerful insight that I wanted to share here. Only 4% of us never worry what people think about us. Only 4% of us. So 96% of us, the vast majority, are super conscious about the impression that we make. And that's why it's so important that we kind of spend some time thinking about this subject. So one of the biggest challenges that we face when making a great impression and when we kind of approach this topic is that self-doubt. And who do we be? Who do we show to impress as us? 55% of us coming out of the global survey we've just done constantly worry about what people think about them at work. That inner kind of thought. We tend to compare ourselves to other people. And in a webinar that I ran earlier in the year for the IGD, it clearly shared that most of us experience times where at work we really do feel like the imposter. We tend to also use externals, which we've covered in past webinars too, to make us feel confident. So we'll tend to wait for people to recognize us or listen to us or give us feedback for our confidence. And so if we don't necessarily receive that, then we can wobble. And ultimately, many of us feel like we can't really be our authentic selves at work. And so that leaves us with this question then: who should I be to make a good impression? How do I do that? So I thought it would be really interesting to start with the session as well with a quick poll. So Robin is going to run a poll for you just to kind of explore how you feel about making your great impressions now. So the question is straightforward. I make a great impression every time I need to. So if you would like to answer yes or no to that poll, we'll have a look at how much you think you make a great impression every time now. So if you just want to answer that poll, I make a great impression every time I need to. Yes, do you think you do that every time? Or no, maybe there are times when perhaps I don't make the greatest impression that I'd like to. Because the opportunity is really there. I think one of the great windows that work provides is an opportunity for all of us to make a difference and to almost use who we are as well as our skills and what we know in order to make that difference. And I've put one of the Be Yourself at Work cards on the right hand side. It's exciting to be me. I get to explore how great I can be. The challenge is that for most of us, we kind of overthink it and worry about kind of what to do and what to say. So Robin, have you got the results of the poll?
We do indeed. Shall we share?
Yeah, let's share.
Okay, here we go.
Look at that. Wow. Okay, so 36% of you feel like you make a great impression every time you need to. Wow, well done. Hopefully we'll cover some tools and tactics to help you to do that even more. And 64% of us experience times where we think maybe we could make a better impression and kind of want to up our game in that sense. Fantastic. That's great. Thank you for sharing, Robin. So let's have a look then. If you've got the workbook in a second, I want us to have a look at the journey of that kind of self-doubt, because when we think about making a great impression, often the first thing that can come into our minds is, will I be good enough? And we do tend to have this cycle where we kind of worry what people think of us, as I've shared. And that can make us quite self-conscious. And the self-consciousness can really kind of push us to kind of doubt our fit and approach sometimes. We tend to overthink maybe then. And we may change to impress. So I'd be super interested how many of you who answered that poll yes, the 36%, are putting on a mask in that moment? Do you have a persona that you quickly kind of pull out, or a strategy? So you change slightly when you want to impress. So we become the person perhaps that we think we need to show in order to be competent. We do tend to hold ourselves back. So we tend to, that worry and that self-consciousness and those kind of things can kind of reduce our influence. And if you do that, then that actually, people are missing out on you. You know, the difference that you can make with help. The majority of us, as I've said, compare ourselves to other people. So we're kind of looking at the people around us and thinking, who shall we be? And ultimately, all of this is reducing our best self. So we're creating a cycle of self-doubt potentially, and undermining our reputation. So let's get the workbook out and the worksheet and just start to explore. I want to give you the opportunity to think about you in your world. And when you open up the worksheet, you'll see on page 2, bottom right, there's a bubble that says, what do you remember positively about people? And I just put a little capture of it here at the bottom. So before we think about what we already do ourselves, I'd just like you can actually type into that worksheet. If on your system it's not letting you do that for any reason, you can use pen and paper, okay? So make a list. What is it that you remember positively about people? Just take a second to reflect. When you perhaps think about the last person that you met, maybe for the first time, or it was a super kind of like interesting or new conversation or presentation, what do you remember about that? What do you remember about them positively? And just make a few notes. Maybe you were in a learning or a training session, or you were in a meeting with a customer or a supplier. What is it that you tend to remember positively about people? And then what I'd like you to do is just kind of start to think about you. So top left on page 2 of your worksheet, it says great impressions. And this exercise, this webinar is about you. So I'd like you just to use that first column just to make a list of what you do now to make a great impression at work. And then the second part says score out of 10, how nervous you feel before and afterwards. So just start by thinking, okay, when I want to make a great impression, who do I show? What do I do? So maybe you use facts and data and you kind of like know your stuff. Maybe you try and become more kind of eloquent, so that you articulate yourself well. Maybe, you try and sort of take on quite a serious persona so that you sound authoritative. Maybe you come in and you smile and you engage your audience and the people around you. Maybe you put on your best dress or your finest suit and tie or latest top and do your hair. What do you do to make your great impression now? So I'm just going to give you a second to do that. So hopefully you've got a few things that you've reflected on that kind of like are your tools, if you like, when you want to make a good impression. The second question on here is super interesting. Out of 10, how nervous do you feel before and afterwards? Okay, so for some of you, the scores will be quite low. Well, this normally is where you've been in a job for a long time, or you really know your stuff, you're the expert. So you'll feel comfortable. Before you score, I'd love you to put yourself in a position where that's not the case. Think about those moments where you have to enter a conversational meeting where you don't know all the answers, because this will test your exercises as we go through this, where you don't, so you're not the expert here, and you've got to make, you think, a good impression. How nervous do you feel both before and afterwards, with 10 high and 0 low? And this will do a couple of things. If your scores are quite low, then that tells me that you're quite comfortable with who you are and being authentic, or you're using some really clear strategies, so that list that you've made is working for you. Okay. If your scores are quite high, so you feel quite nervous ahead of making, feeling like you've got to make a good impression, and afterwards, you're quite nervous. In other words, you kind of, with that, where it's going round and round in your head, and you're kind of playing again and again what you said and what you could have said, and those things, then it's probably time to kind of work on some different strategies and help your confidence so that you can be more comfortable by being you. So it's different for all of us. We can all learn to do this better. That's certainly one thing that I do know and have learned. So we've explored what you remember about people, and we've explored what your current strategies are. How different are they? When you look at what you remember about other people, are they different things to what you do to impress? In our experience, most people try and impress with facts, logic, data. You might become more serious, those kind of things. You might try and inject a little bit of fun if you can, if it's appropriate or not. But how different are those things? The things we tend to remember about people actually are more about who they are. It's their energy, it's their persona, it's how clear and comfortable they are in themselves, but also how much they care about you, how much they're interacting with you, and how much they're seeing the best in you. So it's super interesting. I would just really encourage you to reflect on the difference between what you remember and what you're trying to be remembered for, and whether there's any differences there. And I wanted to share some tips, just thinking about those things around how to really up your impressions and making that good impression. And there's some patterns of behavior that can really work, and it's not always what you think. And I've hinted at that when I just shared around the behaviors points and the energy. So here's some top tips for you about making a good impression. The first tip I put down, and you'll see the Be Yourself at Work cards, I let others own their conversations. If you move into a conversation or a meeting and you hijack that conversation, that essentially is losing you power and it's losing you audience. Most of us, unfortunately, hijack other people's conversations. A good way to test whether you do it is to start to listen to other people. So if you're hybrid working or back in the office, or you're commuting at all, a great place to start this is to listen to other people's conversations. Somebody will say, oh, I went to see this film, or I went to see the James Bond film, or I went to this restaurant. And the other person will say, oh, I went and saw that film and I went to this restaurant instead. Let me tell you about that. And they've hijacked that conversation. If you can make it about the other person rather than feeling like you need to lead that conversation, people will remember you for all the right reasons because you're making it about them. My second point is that a lot of us self-deprecate when we want to make a good impression. In other words, we'll kind of put ourselves down a little bit. The vast majority will be in branding and grocery and distribution and business and those things. You wouldn't buy a brand if it told you how rubbish it was, would you? You just wouldn't do it. So, don't self-deprecate. Remember that, knowing you're great is good, and be yourself and sell yourself rather than put yourself down. The last point on here, if I just move the box out of the way, it might be easier for you to see, says, I show people that I like them. Now, this seems like a really simple tool, but wow, does it work? If you come back to that link between self-doubt and the fact that we worry what people think about us, if you can be the one that when somebody looks at you, you see them and you show them with your eyes, with your smile, with your energy, with your conversation that you like them and you're interested, you're done. They will remember you, because it's super rare, unfortunately, that people do that we tend to feel like we've got to be the one that shares and sounds competent and all of those things to make a good impression, rather than really making it about others and showing them that we're super interested in them and we like them. So if we constantly worry about what people think about us, be the one that helps people not to do that. Be impressed by the people that you meet, rather than perhaps worrying so much about how much they think of you and how impressive you are. So let's go back to the worksheet. You'll see in the worksheet there's a scoring exercise on the top right. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to give a score out of 10. 10 is high, 0 is low, of how much you agree with each of the statements, the 10 statements. It should automatically add up to a score out of 100. If it doesn't, then you can use your calculator to add it up. But just have a go at that. You can click in and actually score out of 10 your agreement with each of those statements. And let's see how healthy, if you like, your approach to impressions is for yourself. So I'm going to just go on mute for a second and give you a minute to do that. So just out of 10, 10 high, 0 low, or 1 low in this case. Just another few seconds, just to work through those 10 questions. And if you can, give yourself a score out of 100. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of food for thought to think about what's happening within you when you think about making a good impression. Our data and research shows that the vast majority of us have got fairly low scores out of 100. Probably between about 50 and 60% is definitely the average. But I want you to really think about your scores. And in particular, I just want to highlight question 8 on that scoring. It says, I always show positive energy when I meet others at the beginning and end of conversations. Now, this is super important. We think about first impressions. We don't always think about last impressions. You know those times where you're a bit nervous about the meeting and you come in and you've done your prep, you've got your stats and your data and everything ready, and you kind of pump yourself up and you're there and you're using your strategies to impress. And then it starts going well. So it starts going well, it's all good, people are talking, they're smiling, you're getting that kind of feedback and recognition that this conversation is going well, and you start to relax. And when you start to relax, things feel good, they feel comfortable. two things potentially can then happen that could derail your impression. And this is where we come to last impressions. The first thing is you might miss out on that final moment. So if you're so relaxed that things have gone so well, you could just kind of let things drift. There's a lot of evidence that says that people will remember you more for the end of a conversation than they will for the beginning of a conversation. And so if you don't participate in a moment at the end of a conversation, you're missing out on the opportunity to make a great last impression. And in many ways, last can become lasting. Okay, so make it a habit, if you like, a routine at the end of a meeting or a conversation where to ensure that you do consciously make a last impression so that you use that lastingness. But the second thing that can potentially derail us is that we're so relaxed that sometimes we scupper that last impression. So we might be slightly inappropriate, or we might kind of lose a train of thought. The trick is to be conscious the whole of that session. Think about if you drive, we took a driving test. You didn't kind of switch off 5 minutes towards the end, did you? You carried on all the way at the same level of energy. It's the same when you want to make a great impression. So be careful of any kind of complacency or being kind of almost like letting go, because again, you could make the wrong last impression, which unfortunately could become the lasting impression. Okay, so it's worth thinking about that. Before we then go to some tips and another poll in a second, I'd like you to look at the second column that's on your worksheet. It says, what are your strengths as a person? What positive feedback have you had? So just really step into that for a second. What do you say your strengths are as a person? No spreadsheets. I'm taking for granted that you're brilliant at your job from a skills perspective. Okay, so I'm talking about you. So what are your key strengths as a person? List them. Maybe they're super friendly. Maybe you're the positive one. Maybe you're the calm one that likes to look at things from all angles. You might be very logical. You might be very creative. Maybe your energy is always super steady and calm. What are your strengths as a person, as a character? Just type them into that second column on that second page. You might also want to add any positive feedback about you as a person. So again, not the skills, the spreadsheets, the facts, the data, the numbers. I'm taking for granted that, you know, you're all doing brilliant in your careers, you'll be nailing all of that stuff. It tends to be what we think about when we're making a good impression. Think about any feedback you've had about your persona, your behavior. Maybe you're known for really listening, for really engaging people. Maybe you're known for being the one that says the right thing in the right moment, despite the fact that you're reflective the rest of that session. Maybe you're the one that makes super notes and summarizes things for people. What is it that you've had feedback on that you do well when it comes to being you? We're also busy sometimes beating ourselves up that we don't always reflect on our natural strengths and character as people. And it's that person, it's you, it's authenticity and being yourself positively that's going to make the greatest impression. Drawing your attention to question 2 on that grid that you've just scored. I bring a unique contribution and know the difference that I make. That little list that you've just created, that is your unique contribution. So rather than potentially thinking about the list on the left, because maybe what you're, as I said earlier, maybe what you're doing now is something that you've created or you take on or you've copied or is a strategy or just about facts, data, persona. Who knows? We're all different. How different are those two columns? And are you using enough of the strategies in column 2, your positive character traits, your positive behavioral feedback, to go, okay, I'm going to be me, so I'm going to be super positive and reflective because that's my core strength. Or I'm going to be me, I'm going to speak up, share my ideas because I'm super talkative, I'm really a people person, and I love to create. And I've had that feedback as well. So, you're using your natural strengths and using them all the way through that experience, not just as a first and last impression. So let's just move down to a second poll then, before I move on to some tips before we go to the Q&A. Let's have a look at how much all of you are thinking about impressions at the beginning of a meeting and also at the end of a meeting now. Okay, so it's just interesting. I think I know what you're going to share based upon our research and data, but Robin, would you mind running that poll? Here we go. So first question then, I think about my impression at the beginning of a meeting. How many of us are actually thinking about the impression that we're going to make in this session? Yes or no? I'm going to give you a minute just to complete that. Okay, so just type in yes, click yes or no. I think about my impression at the beginning of a meeting. And Robin, would you like to share the results? There you go, 94%. Yes, 94% of us are consciously thinking about the impression we make at the beginning of a meeting. But how about the end? Let's have a look. So let's run the second poll, if that's okay, Robin. Think about you in a meeting again. How many of you are thinking about making great impression end of a meeting? So just again, click yes or no. How much are you thinking consciously at the end of meeting or conversation about making a great impression? Let's give you a second to do that. Okay. And again, I'm pretty sure I know what this is going to share, but Robin, okay, so yes, we do think about just over half of us are thinking about the end, but 46% of us aren't. And what I would also say is that if any of you who are in the no section, if you've got colleagues that are in commercial or sales or customer facing roles, they will be super brilliant at this. So they will know that actually people will remember them for that second impression as well. So that's a good tip for any of you who aren't in commercial. Go and talk to some of your commercial colleagues. So it's super important. Before I move on to tips about making positive memories for you, I'd just like to get you thinking about not just conversations or meetings and Zooms and Teams and things like that, which we're focused on, but also think about things like emails and written documents and audio. We don't tend to use audio a lot, but it's a really good way of making an impression. So there are apps like Vidyard that you can actually create small videos, but you can also record just short kind of thoughts and reports and examples using Zoom or Teams, or even just kind of recording audio on your phone. It's actually really rare that people do that, and when they do, I would say there's a couple of things that kind of become magic. The first thing is you save people time and you save yourself time. It can take quite a long time to word something perfectly, whereas if you say it, it can be actually quite quite quick, it's also quicker often for people to listen to it rather than read it. And we have to read so much all the time. So audio would be a really good top tip for me, and Vidyard and video, to share and make a great impression rather than just always emailing. That's a good place to be. And also just kind of think about when you're constructing emails and things like that, that everything we've explored is the same, that you want to sort of maintain throughout any of that communication. It's about them. It's not just about you and what you need. So you know, bringing in aspects of those strengths, that list, you know, the creativity, the calmness, the logic, whatever it is that you listed as your kind of core strengths as a person, that should also be reflected in the subject lines of your emails, the beginning of your you know, first couple of lines of an email, and what you do to sign off. So think about how you can bring more character and more of your natural authenticity to your written emails. So a few tips then to think about when you think about making positive memories across calls, meetings, interviews, emails. The first point I wanted to make is that it's pretty basic, but making the effort can go a long way. And I put here, make the same effort as you would for the Queen. If you were going to meet your favourite rock star or poet or actor or actress or whatever that you admire in your world, or politician, I think you'd probably make quite a good effort that day. You'd probably do your hair differently, or make sure that you dress a certain way. Decide to be your best every day. If you can kind of have that mentality every day, that's super powerful. The second thing I wanted to share is body language. Most of us are really unconscious of the body language that we portray, and hopefully you're not all sat like this as our friend here in the middle is, listening to this webinar and exploring you. You cannot get away from the fact that open, positive body language really sells you and makes a great impression. So be really physically engaged. There is definitely a pattern in our research and feedback that shows when you are on a virtual meeting, your body language tends to be less conscious and more negative than when you're face to face. So if that's you, be conscious of the body language that you're portraying when you're on Zoom and Teams and those things. We talked about the final one all the way through. Maintain your focus throughout a meeting. Close to be remembered. Okay, close to be remembered. That's what you're really aiming for. Make it about others. Questions about rather than feeling like you've got to be the one that proves yourself. So it's kind of like a pull approach, rather than I'm going to prove to you that I know what I'm talking about, to make your good impression. There's also a real, in all of the decades I've worked in grocery and distribution my whole life, I even did a good degree in manufacturing, and I've been in the simple people space, just the people space, for the last kind of 15, 16 years. And all of that time, as I look back and with my expertise now on making a good impression in people, you cannot get away from that statement of the best person that you can be is yourself. So it's super exhausting to pretend to be anyone else. So really focus on working on being you and knowing that the best person that you can be you, because natural equals authentic, definitely. And then finally, all of us at times can feel this sense of the imposter. We can kind of worry and overthink about the impression we make, or whether we're going to do it right, those kind of things. If you put that on its head, that means we're all quite sensitive souls. And I know that that's true for all of us. We all can kind of be a bit oversensitive at times to things. We can take things personally. We might try and hide it and keep it within our inner world. But actually, that is a power in itself. So can you use your sensitivity that currently maybe is shrouded with that self-doubt and driving that actually outwards to tune in to other people and to be intuitive. Because the fact that if you're one of the people on the webinar, which is for most of us, that has times where your inner critic's really beating yourself up privately, or you're comparing yourself to others, or you're thinking that you're not good enough and feeling a bit like the imposter, that means you've got that tuning in, but you're tuning in potentially negatively to you. So turn it outwards, ignore you, and make it about others, and use that brilliant sensitivity to read your audience, and you use your strengths to make your great impression. So I hope that has been useful for you. I'm bang on time, Robin. So what I'd love to do is open up the floor. If you have any questions, then you might want to pop them in the chat. There might be some there already. And you could also pop in the chat if you'd like to. You can unmute and ask your question live, and I'll see if I can help. So Robin, I'm going to hand over to you.
Right. Here hang on. Can everyone see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
Fantastic. Okay, so yeah, so as Liz said, we have now got about 10 minutes for Q&A. Spot on with your timing again, Liz, so thank you very much. We're going to go straight into questions. So I have one question that's in the Q&A box, but I also saw that somebody, I think somebody did have their hand raised. So let's go with the questions that I saw first. So for those who are neurotypical and find eye contact difficult, are there strategies to reduce the stress of doing this at work, given eye contact's importance to good impressions?
Yeah, I love that question. It's so important. Definitely you can practice it. So the first thing that we have done for a long time in our workshops is to use comfort with eye contact as a gauge of confidence. So outside of work, so ignore work for a second, outside of work, have a go at rating how comfortable you feel. So if you sat with somebody you know really well, and you actually forced yourself just to sit almost in silence and just look at them, how long can you hold that? How uncomfortable do you feel? That is a super gauge rather, of how confident you are in yourself. And that's what you need to work on. So it is about remembering and practicing looking at people in the eye as much as possible. But it's actually the discomfort with doing that, which comes down to confidence, that actually I would suggest that you really work on. There are some great webinars, Robin, aren't there, saved in the backlog around confidence. So yes, that's definitely something that I would recommend, is to look back in the IGD library of webinars and work on confidence. But most of us who struggle with confidence, which is the root of that discomfort, we're looking to externals for our confidence. So we'll want we'll check that we're being recognized, or we're getting good feedback, or people are listening to us, or we're trusted, and those things. And all of that's outside of your control. So you can't really control it, and that creates a lack of resilience. So that's when we, our confidence can go up and down as a result, because we can't force people to like us or listen to us or give us good feedback. So my number one tip for building confidence would be, one, choose to have it, because it is a choice. The second thing is to build real confidence within yourself, and not necessarily look outside of yourself to others to give you that confidence. So work on positive affirmation. Look at the strengths that you've listed today and focus on them and be more of them, so that you're inside yourself going, oh, that went really well because I used my creativity. Oh, that went really well because I was being positive, which actually I am generally positive. And you'll find that your confidence builds, and the more your confidence builds, the more you'll feel comfortable looking people in the eye. Yeah, like that's helpful.
Brilliant. We are getting lots of questions coming through, and we're not going to be able to get through to all of them, but I will share with Liz afterwards. That's okay. So let's just find some good ones. Okay. So how do you know you've given a good impression without constantly asking for feedback?
I love that. That's a brilliant question. Yeah, number one answer is give yourself feedback. So it's super easy for your brain, isn't it, to go into overdrive and think, oh, you know, what are all the things that I did wrong and what would I do differently? But actually, I would just always take a moment and think, right, okay, who was I in that session? And was I being me at my best? And it's that should be your gauge rather than the feedback from others, because all of the evidence and research shows that actually when you're being you at your best, you'll make a good impression. So it's like not comparing yourself to other people. You can compare yourself to you, and that should be your gauge as to whether you've made a great impression.
Nice. Okay, here's a topical question. What is the best way to greet people in an interview scenario, given that you can no longer shake hands?
Oh, I love it. Yes. Oh no, it's true, isn't it? When I don't know how many of you are automatically still kind of thinking, oh, this is weird not to shake hands. I think think about, we try and make this super simple for everybody, and then something you can practice. Think about someone you've not met for a long time and you really like to see. Okay, so it might be like a family member or a friend that you've not seen for a long time, someone you'd love to see. And imagine that you were going to see them now, but obviously there's COVID about, so you can't touch, you can't hug, you can't do any of that stuff that perhaps you would normally. Think about that moment when you see them. What would they see? I think they'd probably see a big fat smile on your face. And I think your eyes would be shining and you'd be absolutely super excited. You also wouldn't be worried about whether you were saying the right thing, doing the right thing, having the right CV, or any of those things. You would just be genuinely happy to see them. And that's how I would suggest that in an interview, any interview scenario, you show up initially.
So we've kind of flipped the questions on this from this particular person. So say we've spoken about creating great first impressions. Somebody would like to know, do you have any tips on how to reverse a bad first or last impression?
I think that's a really good question. I think it is definitely doable. I think speed is quite important. So you want to address any challenges quite quickly. But before you do that, I would just ask yourself what's telling you haven't made a good impression. And if you've actually been told that, then that's different. But we're so busy to beat ourselves up and challenge and question ourselves that actually you might think you've made a not great impression, but it's absolutely fine. So I would challenge your own thinking first of all. If you do think that you could have done better and things could get damaging for you, I would act quite quickly. And then everything I've shared here is almost amplified. So you want to apologize, but you want to be really kind of like authentically vulnerable and really you, and just be super honest and just say, look, I was really nervous, or I felt really uncomfortable because this happened, and I just want to share that my strengths are X, Y, and Z, and I'd love to have the opportunity to show you that. So perhaps we can have another conversation at some point when it works for you. And most people won't do that. They'll just run into a corner and hide. So I think if you can do that, that is always good. And I think you'll find people are much more forgiving than perhaps you fear as well.
I've got time, just looking at the clock now, I've got time for a couple of questions. So the penultimate question for the afternoon: for those of us who are deeply introverted, what is the best way to make a good impression whilst being authentic?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. So I'll try and not run over time, Robin. Basically, when you think about yourself, if you label yourself as introverted, which at times we all are, then I would really encourage you to explore that label for you. So if you imagine that this is a file and this says introverted on it, open it up and just look at what it is that you do when you're feeling introverted positively. the vast majority of you, I know, because of my experience working through people's values, is you'll be reflective, you'll be thoughtful, you're probably quite calm, you like to think things through, you like to kind of methodically kind of reflect, you know, those kinds of things. So you almost have an inner world that actually, when you can use it, it's great, it's quite powerful, it's quite calm, it's those things. So stay with that thought and let's put that into making a great impression. So we've just kind of got rid of the label, and instead of the label, we've got calm, thoughtful, reflective, inner world, thinking things through, going into making a great impression. So coming in, we're talking about using our strengths and being ourselves. So this is using our strengths and being ourselves, that calm, reflective, thinking things through. That is how you enter that first section of a meeting or a conversation, remembering what I shared as a tip around meeting somebody that you'd love to see that you've not met for a long time, because just because you have your own inner world doesn't mean that you can't enjoy connecting with other people and finding out more about them. So come in with a nice shiny smile and those things, but also with the energy of your relaxed, calm, reflective thoughtfulness. You don't have to go in bounding full of energy and talking non-stop and everything else. Some of us do that, but some of us do that because we're nervous too. So focus on the fact that, you know, you have these core strengths within you, and be those things, and then externalize them. I've been reflecting on how great it's going to be to meet you. I'd love to let you know that, you know, I'm quite a thoughtful person. So as we go through this conversation, if I pause, and I'll let you know that I'm going to pause, it's because I'm really thinking about what you're saying, because I'm super interested. So you're really using the fact that you know, what you used to label as introvert actually is a huge strength. That reflection, inner world, thinking things through, you know, making sense of stuff. And that's in your energy. So there's no drama, you're very grounded, you're calm, you're thoughtful, and you're being those things when you start that conversation. You know, these labels can be so damaging. So just be you, just be you.